For centuries, the glittering crowns of Europe have dazzled the world, symbols of divine power, authority, and absolute control. But behind those golden masks lay something darker. Secrets buried beneath marble palaces, hidden chambers, and blood-soaked thrones, secrets that would make even the most loyal subjects tremble. Welcome, dear listener, to History 1, where the past refuses to stay silent. If you wish to hear more stories the world was never meant to know, subscribe and stay with us. Because tonight, we pull back the velvet curtain that has long concealed what the kings of Europe were truly hiding. They say history is written by the victors, but in Europe, it was often rewritten by the kings themselves. Every dynasty carried its own legend, its own divine right to rule. Yet beneath the carefully painted portraits and polished family trees were stains of deceit, forbidden bloodlines, secret pacts with the church, and even experiments that blurred the line between faith and madness. The story begins, as many such tales do, with silence. In the winter of 1711, an archivist named Étienne Duval was ordered to clean out the abandoned library of the Château de Montclair, a once grand royal residence in the French countryside. Inside, he found a sealed chest, small enough to be overlooked but heavy enough to suggest it wasn't meant to be opened. When the lock was finally broken, Étienne uncovered something no historian expected. Letters written by European kings, not to their ministers, not to their queens, but to each other, discussing a secret alliance, a pact hidden from both church and parliament. The letters were signed by Louis XIV of France, Charles II of England, and Leopold IV of the Holy Roman Empire. Three rulers who were, officially, bitter rivals. Yet the tone was not one of hostility, it was of conspiracy. In one letter dated May 1673, Louis XIV wrote in cipher, "The fire beneath our crowns burns from the same source. The line of men is not as it appears to the world. We are bound not by treaty, but by blood that is older than the throne itself." Older than the throne itself. Historians have long debated whether this was poetic rhetoric or something far more literal. What could three monarchs, separated by religion, culture, and ambition, have shared that made them family in secrecy? That mystery would have remained buried, if not for the sudden disappearance of Étienne Duval. He was last seen leaving the archives with the chest, claiming he had discovered something that would unmake history. His body was found 3 days later in the Seine River. The chest was gone, and every mention of it, every note he made, was systematically erased from the royal record. Coincidence? Or the first silencing in a centuries-long cover-up? Over the next 100 years, fragments of this mystery reappeared in scattered places. A blood-stained seal found in Vienna, marked with a crown split into 3 parts. A diary belonging to a maid in Versailles who wrote of a hidden son of the Sun King, with eyes unlike any man's. A monk's confession from Prague, claiming to have seen a gathering of crowned men performing a ritual beneath a cathedral, to renew the ancient covenant of the blood. And then there were the portraits, those strange paintings tucked away in dusty museum basements across Europe. When viewed under ultraviolet light, restorers discovered that many had been altered, faces repainted, symbols erased. In one portrait of Louis XIV, beneath the surface layer, an artist had once painted a serpent-shaped mark coiling beneath the king's collar, a mark identical to one found in portraits of the Habsburg emperors and the Stuart kings. Coincidence? Or a shared emblem of something they were sworn to protect? As the centuries passed, whispers of this royal covenant resurfaced whenever the world seemed on the brink of upheaval. During Napoleon's conquest, British spies reported the theft of sacred genealogies. In 1917, when the Romanovs fell, documents were found hinting that the blood of rulers was never purely human. And during World War II, the Nazis scoured Europe for relics tied to the blood of kings, an artifact said to hold the secret to the divine right itself. But what was this bloodline they guarded so fiercely, and why even today do certain archives remain sealed under orders marked Confidentiell Royal, Top Secret Westminster, or Kaiserliche Geheimakte, restricted for another 100 years? The answer may lie not in one kingdom, but in all of them. Because from Spain to Sweden, from the Vatican to Vienna, every royal family in Europe, no matter how distant, has one thing in common: a missing link in their genealogy, a generation erased from official history, and a story that, when pieced together, paints a portrait far more terrifying than any myth of divine right. What were the kings of Europe hiding? Perhaps it wasn't treasure, but the truth of who they really were. To uncover the truth, we must follow the trail left behind, not by kings, but by those who served them: the scribes, the alchemists, the confessors, the ones who saw too much and lived long enough to regret it. One such man was Brother Matthias of Mainz, a Benedictine monk who, in the late 1600s, was summoned to serve at the court of Emperor Leopold. His duty was simple: record the emperor's dreams. But in the winter of 1688, Matthias wrote something that terrified the Church so deeply his writings were locked away in the Vatican's Archivum Secretum, the secret archives. In his final entry, dated January 12th, he wrote, "The emperor speaks in his sleep of the serpent within the crown, of the sons born under false stars, and of a pact made beneath the catacombs of Rome, a promise of endless rule sealed not in ink, but in blood." Blood. The word appears again and again in documents connected to Europe's monarchs, not as a metaphor for lineage, but as something sacred, even mystical. Matthias claimed that deep beneath the old basilica of St. John Lateran in Rome, the emperor and two other crowned rulers, though he never named them, participated in a ceremony that had not been seen since the days of Constantine, a ritual invoking what they called the blood of the first king. To understand what that meant, we must go back further, beyond the Renaissance, beyond the Middle Ages, to a legend whispered in the courts of Charlemagne himself. The legend of Rex Originum, the first king. According to an early 9th century manuscript discovered in Aachen, Rex Originum wasn't born of man alone. He was said to be half divine, descended from beings who came from the stars, or, as one monk later rephrased, the sons of the shining ones. His blood, they believed, granted wisdom, dominion, and unnaturally long life. It was this bloodline, the text claimed, that flowed through Europe's first dynasties: Merovingian, Carolingian, Capetian, Habsburg. Every monarch who claimed divine right might not have been speaking metaphorically at all. When Brother Matthias's writings were rediscovered in the early 19th century by a Jesuit historian, Father Alaric, they caused a quiet panic. Within weeks, the historian vanished during a trip to Vienna. His apartment was ransacked, his papers burned. The only item missing was a small lead-bound book labeled Sanguis Regum, the blood of kings. What frightened the Church was not merely heresy, but the suggestion that this bloodline could be tracked through genetic inheritance. That the same rare markers, once thought myth, appeared in the DNA of several European monarchs across centuries. By the late 1800s, scientists were beginning to uncover patterns, the strange recessive traits that appeared only in royal families, the elongated skulls in some Habsburg burials, the recurring deformity of the jaw, the eerie similarity of eye color across generations separated by nations and wars. To the geneticists, these were coincidences. To the secretive orders within the royal courts, they were proof. One document, buried in the British Library under MS Ad, 2175, describes a secret society known as Custodes Sanguinis, the Keepers of the Blood. Formed in the late 1400s, their purpose was to guard the royal genealogies and ensure the purity of the bloodline. Their motto, Ex uno, omnis regnant. From one, all rule. Members of this order were not nobles. They were scholars, priests, and physicians sworn to silence. They controlled marriages, legitimized heirs, and, when necessary, erased evidence of those unworthy to bear the mark. They called it the cleansing. And it happened far more often than the history books admit. A 17th-century ledger from the Spanish court lists 4 removals for impurity of the line in a single decade. The notes are written in code, Lilium mortuum, dead lilies. Each corresponds to a mysterious death of a royal child, all aged between 8 and 12. Officially, they died of illness. Unofficially, they bore signs that the sacred blood had thinned. Yet even among the kings, there were rebels. In England, King James II was rumored to have tried to break the covenant, to open the vaults of the first king. According to a letter from a Jesuit intermediary, he sought to reveal to the people that the divine right was built upon deception. Weeks later, the glorious revolution forced him from the throne. He fled to France, and the vault, if it ever existed, was sealed again. The story might have ended there, another myth lost to time. But 2 centuries later, during World War I, British intelligence intercepted a coded German message referring to Operation Rex. It mentioned blood samples taken from the descendants of royal families across Europe. One of the scientists involved, a Dr. Heinrich Wirth, later claimed that the samples were not for ancestry, but for revival. Revival of what? A dynasty? Or something far older? What were the kings of Europe truly hiding, and why did so many die to keep it buried? Operation Rex, a name lost to time until a single page surfaced in the archives of the Prussian Academy, decades after the Second World War. The document was classified Geheime Reichssache, a secret of the realm. Its content? Disturbing. It referred not to a political operation, but to a biological resurrection project, allegedly tracing its origins to the late Middle Ages. According to the fragment, Europe's monarchies, long before modern genetics, believed they possessed a divine substance, passed from king to king, generation to generation. The document called it sanguis primus, the first blood. Not a metaphor, a literal compound, a fluid preserved, hidden, and periodically renewed through ceremony and science alike. In the margin, an annotation written in the 1940s German hand reads, "The experiment continues. The essence is viable." What essence? No one could say, but in 1942, deep beneath a castle in the Austrian Alps, the Nazis began a classified project under the SS Ahnenerbe, the same occult research branch that sought the Ark of the Covenant and the Spear of Destiny. They called it Project Königserbe, Project Heir to the King. Witness accounts describe sealed glass ampoules labeled with royal crests, Bourbon, Habsburg, Romanov, Stuart. Each contained trace samples of ancient blood, supposedly gathered from tombs, mummified remains, or relics long thought lost. Their mission? To extract and replicate the so-called divine essence of rulership. But what terrified the Allies most wasn't the occultism, it was the science. Captured documents revealed that the Nazi researchers had successfully isolated a rare protein sequence found in the embalmed remains of 17th century royalty. They believed this protein held regenerative properties, perhaps explaining the fabled longevity of certain royal figures in history. And though the laboratory was destroyed in 1945, a handful of those scientists were quietly recruited in the aftermath of the war by both sides. By 1948, British intelligence had already reopened the investigation under a different name, Project Meridian. Its goal, to recover and suppress any surviving evidence of Sanguis Primus. Files later declassified in the 1990s confirmed that MI6 agents scoured abandoned castles and monasteries across Europe, removing artifacts connected to royal tombs. One report from Vienna described a hidden vault beneath Schönbrunn Palace, a circular chamber lined with black stone, illuminated by a single golden chalice. Inside that chalice, they found what appeared to be congealed blood. It was still warm to the touch. The discovery was never made public. Officially, it never existed. But unofficially, it marked the first modern reappearance of what some scholars now call the king's substance. To understand its power, we must look at a curious historical pattern: the inexplicable health, vigor, and endurance of certain monarchs. Louis XIV ruled for over 72 years, a record untouched in European history. King Charles III of Spain survived 4 fatal illnesses that killed his physicians before him. Even Tsar Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, survived multiple assassination attempts, including poisoning severe enough to kill several servants who merely tasted his food. Coincidence? Or something more? Contemporary witnesses described these kings as possessing an unnatural radiance, a vitality that seemed to flow from within. In one letter from a Venetian diplomat in 1682, he wrote, "I looked upon His Majesty, and saw in his eyes a brightness like molten gold. I have never seen such fire in mortal man. It was beautiful and terrifying." For centuries, the Church worked tirelessly to mask such stories under the veil of superstition, miracles, divine favor, or rumor. But behind closed doors, they conducted their own secret inquiry. In 1724, a Vatican committee known as the Congregatio de Puritate Sanguinis, the Congregation for the Purity of Blood, began cataloging every royal relic reported to contain sacred fluid. From the heart of St. Louis Nifon to the embalmed remains of the Habsburg emperors, samples were discreetly collected, analyzed, and sealed. A marginal note in Latin reads, "Custodiatur donec tempus rideat," keep it safe until the time returns. The time for what? No one knows, but according to a later document discovered in 1963 within the Vatican archives, certain blood vials had been reactivated, transferred to a private research facility in Turin. The funding? Mysteriously traced to the private accounts of European royal foundations. If this is true, then what began as a medieval legend had, by the mid-20th century, become a quiet international secret, shared, guarded, and possibly continued by the very descendants of the ancient kings themselves. Perhaps this was the true nature of monarchy. Not merely the right to rule, but the inheritance of something that was never meant for mankind. If the kings of Europe were guarding an ancient substance, one capable of extending life, heightening perception, or altering human potential, then the divine right of kings wasn't a metaphor for God's will. It was biology. It was science disguised as holiness. And yet every experiment that sought to harness this essence has ended in silence. Archives closed, witnesses vanished, laboratories burned, as if history itself was protecting a secret that refuses to die. Some say the last ampule, the last trace of the first blood, still exists. Hidden not in a museum, nor a vault, but inside a living descendant, a modern royal whose lineage has never been publicly questioned. And if that is true, then the kings of Europe may not have been hiding their sins, but hiding what they were becoming. The idea that kings could possess something inhuman, not in cruelty or ambition, but in essence, sounds like myth. And yet, scattered through Europe's oldest royal archives are clues that refuse to disappear. Whispers of a lineage that must never mix, of keepers of the mark, and of a light within the blood. Our story now leads us to Spain in the year 1807, the eve of Napoleon's invasion. While the French armies marched toward Madrid, a young archivist named Diego Velasco was ordered to evacuate secret royal documents from the Escorial Palace. Among the crates of treaties and ledgers, he discovered a sealed tube made of crystal, wrapped in silk, labeled Sanguis Alfonsi, non aperiatur, blood of Alfonso, do not open. Velasco's curiosity overcame him. He broke the seal. Inside was a dark, viscous fluid that shimmered gold when held to the light. According to his personal notes, preserved in the Madrid Historical Society, the liquid began to pulse, faintly, as if alive. Moments later, he collapsed. When he awoke, his vision had changed. Colors appeared sharper, brighter, as though he could see through light itself. Days later, he began to hear voices, not hallucinations, but whispers in languages he swore he had never learned. Velasco wrote, trembling, "It is not blood as we know it. It carries memory. It carries command. In it are voices of kings long dead, urging, warning, commanding in the tongue of no mortal court." He disappeared 2 weeks later. The sealed tube, as far as history records, was never recovered. But Napoleonic agents who ransacked the palace claimed to have found an empty crystal vessel, warm to the touch. Centuries later, in 1912, a Spanish Jesuit scholar, Father Ortega, claimed to have discovered an identical relic hidden in the catacombs beneath the monastery of San Lorenzo. He was found dead the next morning, eyes open, mouth twisted as if mid-cry, and his veins blackened. The relic? Gone again. Coincidence or curse, whichever one prefers, the same pattern repeated wherever such artifacts emerged. A glimpse of knowledge, a spark of discovery, followed by disappearance, silence, or death. And yet these fragments, each small and scattered, begin to outline something extraordinary, a web of protection, spanning kingdoms, centuries, and faiths. A network determined to guard the royal essence, whatever it truly was. By the late 19th century, European monarchies were fading. Republics rose, revolutions burned across France, Italy, and Russia. The divine right was crumbling. But the secret survived. Because secrets, like bloodlines, find a way. A coded telegram from 1899, preserved in the Austro-Hungarian archives, reads, "The vessel is transferred to London. The custodian remains within the family." That line, "within the family," has obsessed historians ever since. Who was the custodian? Some point to Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, the same man surrounded by mysterious rumors before his untimely death. Others whisper it was King Edward VII himself, whose sudden decline in health was accompanied by strange medical secrecy. In one private correspondence, his physician, Sir Francis Laking, wrote to a colleague in cryptic Latin, "The purity is failing, the gift is unstable, the crown bleeds itself." Was this a metaphor for political exhaustion, or a literal description of a bloodline unraveling? To understand the panic of Europe's monarchs during this time, we must remember, the industrial age had stripped them of their divine image. Science was replacing faith. Machines were replacing miracles. And yet, the kings of Europe clung to an ancient myth, a secret that, if true, would prove they were more than human. Letters from the early 1900s between the courts of Britain, Denmark, and Russia revealed discreet transfers of medical couriers carrying sensitive biological material. Most of these were disguised as diplomatic shipments. Their destination? private laboratories in Geneva and Turin, cities known then for their experimental hematology research. One name appears repeatedly: Dr. Étienne Lavoisier II, a descendant of the famous chemist executed during the French Revolution. Lavoisier wrote in 1907, "I am convinced the old kings possessed a catalyzed serum, a synthesis between natural blood and an unknown element. The substance decays rapidly once removed from a living host." A living host? If Lavoisier was correct, then the essence of kingship was not a relic to be stored in crystal tubes or chalices. It was living inside someone, passed not by ceremony or title, but by blood itself. And if it could not be preserved artificially, it had to be maintained through birth. That would explain centuries of controlled marriages, incestuous unions, and genetic isolation among royal families. Not just to protect political alliances, but to preserve a biological inheritance. An inheritance that perhaps defined their right to rule. So what if the wars, the alliances, the betrayals that shaped Europe for 1,000 years were not merely struggles for land or faith, but struggles to control this one, unseen secret? Every dynasty fighting to keep or capture the last remnants of Sanguis Primus, the blood of the first king. And if even one drop remains today, carried quietly within a modern royal vein, then the question becomes not what they were hiding, but why they still hide it. What if everything we know about monarchy, the jewels, the rituals, the divine coronations, was not ceremony, but containment? 1,000 years of crowns, robes, and blessings not to celebrate kingship, but to seal something within it. Because as the trail continues into the modern age, one thing becomes clear. The kings of Europe weren't merely rulers of men. They were guardians of something their own ancestors warned them never to release. In the winter of 1936, while the world watched the abdication crisis of King Edward VIII, few noticed a peculiar side story buried deep in the London papers. A power outage struck Windsor Castle, lasting nearly 12 hours. The official cause? A lightning storm. But a former palace electrician, decades later on his deathbed, confessed that the blackout wasn't natural at all. He described an explosion beneath the East Wing, near the old royal crypts. The air, he said, smelled of iron and ozone. He was ordered by military men to evacuate immediately. No one was allowed near the sublevels again. When power returned, every blueprint of Windsor's underground vaults was quietly reclassified Royal Security Dossier, Omega. And then came the war. Amidst the chaos of the Blitz, several priceless artifacts were secretly removed from London, not the crown jewels, as many believed, but small sealed caskets labeled only with initials, SP. They were transported to Balmoral Castle in Scotland, guarded by a regiment sworn to silence. To this day, no public record lists what those caskets contained. A declassified MI5 note from 1951 mentions Operation St. Magnus, a covert retrieval of sacred materials of dynastic significance. The document ends abruptly. Reintegration successful, subject stable, line secured. Historians puzzled over this for years. What subject? What line? But then, geneticists studying royal blood samples for medical research noticed something strange. Across several European houses, Windsor, Bourbon, Habsburg, and Romanov, a shared mitochondrial anomaly appeared. Not a disease. A pattern. It seemed to grant a heightened resistance to certain pathogens, faster cellular repair, but also carried a dangerous instability when diluted by outside genes. This was quietly confirmed by a 1987 Cambridge study that was later withdrawn from publication. One of its authors, Dr. Helena Groves, vanished soon after. Her remaining notes, leaked years later, contained a single chilling line. The royal genome is not purely human, and it knows when it is dying. If that line sounds absurd, remember this. Throughout European history, there are periods where multiple kings fell, not in war, but in sudden, mysterious illness. Whole dynasties extinguished in a single generation. The official causes ranged from influenza to assassination, but the pattern is hauntingly consistent. It is as if the bloodline, once contaminated beyond repair, self-destructed. Some researchers, fringe yet eerily methodical, claim to have mapped these collapses. The fall of the Plantagenets in 1485, the end of the Valois line in 1589, the Romanovs in 1917. And each time, another royal house, conveniently interlinked by marriage, rose to take its place, preserving a fragment of the ancient blood. Coincidence? Or a designed continuity, a controlled migration of essence? In 1969, during renovations at Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, workers uncovered a sealed marble door beneath the cellar. Behind it was a room, circular, 8 meters wide, lined with carved Latin inscriptions. At the center stood a stone pedestal engraved with a serpent biting its own tail. And resting upon it, in a crystal container, was what appeared to be a dried clot of dark red substance. Authorities immediately confiscated the find. The site was sealed, the workers paid off, and the Austrian government denied the discovery entirely. But one photograph, blurry, black and white, leaked to a journalist. The caption beneath the image, handwritten in German, read simply, "Das Blut der Könige schläft nicht." The blood of kings does not sleep. Perhaps that is the real reason Europe's monarchies still exist, long after democracy rendered them obsolete. Perhaps the crown, the ceremony, the lineage, all continue not for politics, but for preservation. Because if this substance, sanguis primus, truly flows within royal veins, then it must be maintained, protected, and renewed through time. To let it die would be to let something ancient vanish, something that, according to myth, once bound heaven and earth. And maybe that's why, even today, certain royal archives remain off-limits. Why DNA tests on reigning monarchs are never fully released. Why some portraits in royal galleries still bear faint underpaintings of serpents and suns. The same symbols found in cathedrals, tombs, and secret chapels of Europe's past. Every throne hides a story. Every crown hides a secret. But what the kings of Europe were hiding might be the oldest story of all, the story of blood that should never have been shared. By the end of the 20th century, the world believed monarchy had become little more than a symbol, ceremony, without substance. But beneath the surface of diplomacy and pageantry, the secret of sanguis primus continued to cast its shadow. Because even as crowns grew lighter and parliaments stronger, something ancient still pulsed behind palace walls. And this time, it wasn't in musty tombs or forgotten cathedrals. It was in laboratories. In 1994, the death of an elderly geneticist named Dr. William Armitage drew little attention. He'd been a quiet man, a Cambridge scholar who once worked for the British government during the Cold War. But when his private journals were opened by his daughter, a strange entry emerged, one dated June 1982, written in code and later deciphered by historians. It read, "The Windsor sample confirms the hypothesis. The mitochondrial anomaly matches the Bourbon and Habsburg line. The substance in the blood fluoresces under UV light, golden, not red. It responds to sound." Responds to sound. That note alone was enough to reignite the obsession. For years, conspiracy theorists and academic researchers alike speculated that the royal blood carried an electromagnetic property, something resonant, reactive, a biological echo from whatever, or whoever, first gave it. Dr. Armitage's notes included sketches of waveforms, almost musical in structure, as if the blood itself was singing when exposed to certain frequencies. He called it the harmonic of kingship. But the most chilling line comes at the very end of his notes. I believe the resonance is a lock, and somewhere there must still be a key. Around the same time, strange events unfolded in Turin, Italy, the same city once tied to Vatican biological research. Local workers restoring the crypt of the House of Savoy reported hearing faint humming behind sealed stone walls. When one wall was opened, they found nothing, only an empty cavity lined with iron dust, and a lingering vibration like the aftermath of a struck tuning fork. Within weeks, the crypt was closed again. Official reason: structural instability. But a former priest attached to the restoration later confessed to hearing Latin words echoing faintly through the chamber before the wall was resealed. He couldn't recall all of them, only the last line. Sanguis loquitur. The blood speaks. For centuries, historians treated divine right as superstition, the belief that kings ruled by God's will. But what if divine right was a misunderstood echo of something real, not spiritual, but biological? Something that literally set them apart. In a 2003 scientific symposium in Geneva, a confidential study was quietly presented to select European patrons. Its title: Comparative Genetic Continuity of Eurasian Dynastic Lineages. It never appeared in the public proceedings, but leaked slides revealed staggering similarities between modern royal genomes, patterns statistically impossible without deliberate preservation. One sequence in particular, a strand of unknown origin, appeared in every major royal house. The researchers labeled it simply Fragment X, and the report ended with a sentence that still circulates in whispers among historians. Fragment X is not found in any known human population. It predates recorded history. If that is true, then the first king, Rex Originum, may not have been a myth at all. Perhaps he was real, and perhaps the blood that flowed from him, half human, half something else, became the foundation of every royal house that followed. The implications are staggering. It would mean that for over 1,000 years, Europe's kings weren't just guarding wealth, power, or privilege. They were guarding a living artifact, a fragment of something not entirely of this earth. But here's the question no one wants to ask. If this secret truly survived, is it still being kept today? Modern monarchy appears benign: televised weddings, charity work, tourism. But behind those smiling faces are walls thicker than any medieval fortress. And in those walls, sealed rooms that no historian, no journalist, no outsider has ever entered. In 2017, a whistleblower from the British Security Service, identified only as Subject 9, claimed that beneath Buckingham Palace there exists an underground vault dating back to the 1600s. According to his testimony, it is not a treasury nor a panic room, but a biological archive, temperature-controlled, sealed, guarded 24 hours a day. He described glass tubes mounted in gold frames, each containing a dark fluid that glows faintly under the security lights, and etched above the vault door, "From one, all rule," the same motto as the Custodes Sanguinis, the ancient keepers of the blood. We cannot confirm his story. We may never be able to. But if even a fragment of it is true, then the kings of Europe were never merely men chosen by destiny. They were vessels, chosen by something far older than history. And as long as even one of them lives, the first blood, the secret heartbeat of monarchy, still flows, waiting for the day it will be called upon again. And maybe that's the real reason every crown, every scepter, and every throne still stands. Because beneath the politics and pageantry lies a truth too dangerous to die. The trail leads us now into the 21st century, a world of transparency, DNA testing, and relentless media scrutiny. Yet paradoxically, as our tools for truth have advanced, royal secrecy has deepened. Every birth, every medical procedure, every genetic record within Europe's royal families is now shielded under national security laws. Why? For privacy, we are told. But what kind of privacy requires the same level of protection as nuclear codes? In 2010, a team of medical researchers from the University of Oxford announced a study comparing ancient and modern European DNA, focusing on what they called continuity markers. Publicly, it was described as a genealogical project to trace heritage through mitochondrial DNA. Privately, however, internal communications reveal that several living royal houses refused participation, despite the promise of anonymity. One of the lead scientists, Dr. Clara Henning, later gave an anonymous interview to a German journal, claiming her team had already obtained partial samples through historical relics: blood from ceremonial robes, teeth from royal tombs. She described what she found as beyond classification. Her words: "It is as if the genome has been rewritten, rearranged, guided by an external hand. Not evolution, but preservation, an architecture of intent." Days later, Dr. Henning resigned and disappeared from public life. Her research files vanished. And though her name was quietly removed from the university's directory, her published papers remain, carefully neutral but bearing subtle hints. A graph marked HAP0X with an unexplained annotation: singular, non-human origin. It is tempting to dismiss these fragments as conspiracy, fantasy, or pseudo-history, but when fragments align too perfectly, when separate witnesses describe the same symbols, the same vaults, the same warnings, one must at least ask, what were they all guarding? Throughout Europe, symbols of kingship share a strange consistency. The orb, representing divine authority; the scepter, representing command; and the crown, a ring of gold surrounding the head, where temples meet. But ancient manuscripts, particularly from the Merovingian and Visigothic traditions, describe these regalia differently. They weren't mere symbols, they were conduits, instruments that contain and amplify the essence within the sovereign. The orb, it said, stored the king's resonance, the scepter transmitted it, and the crown completed the circuit between heaven and flesh. If so, then coronation ceremonies, long thought to be ritual, might in truth have been acts of synchronization. The moment when the royal blood and the ancient essence within it were awakened, harmonized, and bound to rule. A medieval text from 1128, De Regum Sacramentum, describes the ceremony in cryptic detail. When the crown of light descends, the blood stirs, the heart of the king and the voice of heaven beat as one. Thus is dominion restored to the rightful bearer. That crown of light, many scholars assumed it referred to divine grace, but in paintings of coronations across centuries, a subtle motif recurs: thin rays of gold emanating not from above, but from within the monarch's brow. Some early observers even claimed to see faint luminosity, as if the crowned heads glowed. In the archives of Westminster Abbey, a forgotten account from the coronation of Charles II in 1661 survives. The chronicler John Evelyn wrote privately in his diary, "When His Majesty received the oil, the air thickened. A strange stillness fell upon all present. I could swear the very walls trembled, and a shimmer of light moved across his face." Was it imagination? Or the same resonance that Dr. Armitage would later record centuries afterward? The royal anointing oil, chrism, has always been a point of mystery. Its recipe is a closely guarded secret. Officially, it contains olive oil, orange blossom, rose, jasmine, and cinnamon. But in the 1953 coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, the exact formula was never fully disclosed, not even to the archbishop who performed the rite. The ingredients, it was said, came from the sacred reserve. And that reserve, according to a 19th-century royal chemist's log, was mixed with a drop of the king's essence. The same phrase found in Habsburg and Bourbon documents centuries earlier. Coincidence? By the time Elizabeth II reigned, science had replaced superstition. But those who witnessed her private anointing, shielded from cameras by a canopy, spoke afterward of something otherworldly. One attendant reportedly fainted. Another later described a sudden brilliance that filled the air, like sunlight reflected through water. It was quickly dismissed as emotion, reverence, imagination, and yet every coronation since has kept that one moment hidden from public view. The only part of the ceremony the world is never allowed to see. Why? Because if the kings of Europe truly carry an ancient essence, if that essence can be awakened through ritual, then the secret they hide is not of the past. It is ongoing. Perhaps the crowns and ceremonies are not relics of a forgotten age. Perhaps they are maintenance, a pulse, a ritual of renewal ensuring that the oldest blood in history continues to flow, generation after generation. And if so, the true danger may not be what the kings of Europe were hiding. But what would happen if it ever awakened completely? History has always shown that power never truly disappears. It only changes form. And for Europe's royal dynasties, survival was not only political, it was biological. What if, beneath centuries of diplomacy, marriages, and alliances, every royal decision was designed not to rule nations, but to preserve a lineage, one that guarded something older than kingship itself? By the mid-2000s, whispers of the blood vaults began circulating among scholars of hidden history. Secret facilities said to exist beneath palaces from London to Vienna, each one allegedly storing biological material from every monarch since the Middle Ages. Officially, these vaults don't exist. Yet satellite scans of restricted royal grounds revealed underground chambers precisely where old blueprints suggested, sealed with reinforced titanium doors, untouched for centuries. One such vault, beneath the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, is particularly curious. According to declassified wartime intelligence, when the Nazis occupied Austria in 1938, they attempted to breach a chamber labeled Custodia 1. The door resisted every explosive they tried. When the war ended, American officers inspected the ruins. The report, long buried, reads, "Entrance sealed by non-ferrous alloy unknown to metallurgy. The chamber hums audibly when approached. Standing too near induces nausea and tinnitus." And then, one final line. "Recommend leave undisturbed, possibly sacred or reactive material." Sacred. Reactive. Those words appeared again decades later, in 1999, in an internal note from the British Ministry of Defence, referencing a joint custodial agreement with other European states regarding ancestral biological assets. Assets, not artifacts, not archives. Assets. Someone, somewhere, was still maintaining whatever the kings of Europe had hidden. To understand what they might be protecting, we must return to where monarchy began, the Bronze Age. Long before crowns and castles, before Christianity and empire, there existed a cult of rulers across the Mediterranean, men described not as chosen, but descended. Archaeological evidence from Mycenae, Anatolia, and the Iberian Peninsula shows burial sites of figures with unnaturally elongated skulls, preserved in gold masks. Their genetic markers, analyzed in modern labs, show anomalies in bone density and cranial volume unmatched by typical human evolution. Locals called them Anakim, Tuatha De Danann, or Sons of the Shining One. Every culture had a name for them. Every culture claimed their kings came from them. Could it be that Europe's later monarchies, Merovingian, Carolingian, Plantagenet, inherited not just their myths, but their blood? One 15th century document, the Codex Lucis Regalis, hidden within the Vatican Library, contains a passage few have ever read aloud. It speaks of lignum regum, the line of the kings. It claims that before the flood, the Shining Ones bred with humankind and established the first thrones. When the deluge came, a few survived, carrying within them the seed of celestial dominion. That seed, the Codex warns, is both a blessing and a curse. It grants sight beyond mortal veil, but if stirred by blood unworthy, it consumes the vessel. That would explain the madness that haunted so many royal lines, the paranoia, the sudden violence, the decline into obsession. Perhaps it wasn't simply politics. Perhaps it was biology, the awakening of something their bodies could no longer control. In Paris, 2015, during the restoration of Saint-Denis, the burial place of France's kings, workers uncovered a chamber beneath the nave that had never been catalogued. Inside were dozens of lead canisters. Most contained nothing but dust and bone. But one, sealed in wax, contained a small glass vial of dark liquid. When analyzed, the fluid exhibited an unusual metallic shimmer, almost golden under light, remarkably similar to the royal oil found in coronation relics centuries earlier. Before testing could continue, French authorities confiscated the vial. The official statement, "Out of respect for national heritage." The sample was never seen again. Maybe it was just symbolic oil. Maybe it was something more. Because one witness, a laboratory technician who later spoke under anonymity, claimed that when the vial was first unsealed, the air in the room changed temperature. The liquid moved inside the glass, pulsing like something alive. And when light struck it, faint symbols shimmered on the surface, geometric patterns matching those found carved in the oldest royal crypts across Europe. Patterns so ancient that no one alive remembers who carved them or what they were meant to contain. So, what were the kings of Europe hiding? A lineage that links all royal blood? A secret substance passed through generations? Or something much older? A covenant between humanity and an unknown power that demanded absolute secrecy? Every clue points to one truth. Whatever it was never meant for the world to see. Because even now, those who seek it don't live long enough to tell what they find. And maybe that's why the crowns endure. Because if the secret of that blood were ever revealed, if humanity understood what it truly came from, the idea of kings, of order, of history itself might crumble. For centuries, power has hidden behind ceremony. Behind every golden crown, every oath before God, there has always been something unspoken. But to grasp what the kings of Europe were truly hiding, we must look not at the royal courts of light, but into the shadow monarchies that operated in parallel. Because for every king who ruled openly, there was always another, unseen, advising, whispering, ensuring the ancient order survived. The order of the Custodes Sanguinis, once dismissed as medieval legend, begins reappearing in archives from the 1600s onward. But not as a mere relic. It appears in financial ledgers, land grants, even colonial charters, signed not by monarchs, but by individuals whose names never appear in any family tree. A recurring signature marks them all, a sigil resembling a coiled serpent encircling a drop of gold. Its Latin motto reads, Per sanguinem regnum, through blood, the kingdom. Modern historians assumed it to be a poetic metaphor for loyalty, but the pattern suggests something darker, a quiet continuity between royal houses across nations, united not by politics, but by blood itself. In 1712, the archives of the Vatican record a secret symposium called the Concilium de Origine, a meeting between emissaries of France, Spain, Austria, and the papal curia. The topic: the custody of the blood. The minutes are sparse, but one line stands out. The essence shall not be divided nor diluted by the multitude. Let only the ordained vessels bear it, lest dominion fall into chaos. It sounds theological, until you realize it mirrors the same phrasing used in genetic preservation experiments centuries later. That phrase, shall not be divided nor diluted, implies something heritable, something they were protecting biologically. One of the few surviving members of a French noble line, Count Louis de Rouen, gave a rare interview in 1954. He described how, as a boy, he was taken to an underground chapel beneath his family estate. There, beneath flickering candles, he saw a golden basin filled with a dark, metallic fluid. He was told it was the king's offering, a remnant of the first covenant. When asked what it meant, he said the elders whispered, "To keep the light pure, the vessel must remain royal." The interviewer laughed, assuming it was a child's fantasy. But later researchers confirmed the existence of the chapel. Its walls were inscribed with names of monarchs, not from one nation, but from many: Capet, Habsburg, Bourbon, Stuart. At the center stood an empty pedestal, carved with a single word: Origo. Origin. There's a theory, whispered among a few historians and theologians, that all European monarchies, no matter how distinct, once answered to a central authority far older than any throne. Not the Pope, not the Holy Roman Emperor, but an unseen council dedicated to preserving the original light. References to this council appear sporadically in encrypted correspondences between royal courts. A letter from King Philip IV of France to Edward I of England, dated 1305, reads, "Let the vessel remain hidden until the appointed dawn. The pulse of the blood must not fall silent, or the covenant will shatter." The tone is not political. It's ritualistic, devotional, even fearful, as if both kings were stewards of a secret older than their crowns. But why? Why protect something so zealously for centuries? Perhaps because it offered power, not metaphorical power, but physical. Accounts from the 14th and 15th centuries describe rituals known as the renewal. During famine or plague, kings would retreat to secluded chambers with their closest alchemists. After days of isolation, they would emerge transformed, pale, radiant, and stronger than before. Chroniclers described them as restored by divine fire. It may sound like allegory, but written consistency across France, Spain, and England suggests it was more than myth. In the British Museum lies a sealed scroll once belonging to John Dee, alchemist and advisor to Queen Elizabeth IV. On it, a single passage: "I have seen the elixir of regality, luminous and living. It moves as though it breathes, and in it are the whispers of stars." That elixir was said to have been distilled from the royal essence itself, blood, mixed with alchemical compounds. It was not drunk, but anointed, reawakening what was already within. Dee called it lux sanguinis, the light in the blood. And yet, with each generation, the essence weakened. Too many marriages outside the sacred line. Too much dilution of what they once believed divine. By the dawn of the 20th century, the kings of Europe faced not only revolution and democracy, but extinction of their secret. Letters between King George V and Kaiser Wilhelm II, intercepted during World War I, make reference to the last renewal and to a shared inheritance that must not perish on the field. Whatever it was, Both men understood they carried the same burden. And after the war, after monarchies fell, after empires crumbled, a small network of surviving nobles quietly gathered what remained of their lineages. They formed private trusts, secret foundations, even charitable organizations. But behind the philanthropy, one purpose remained: preserve the blood. It's easy to mock such obsession in the modern world, but history shows, wherever there is secrecy, there is reason. And when secrecy endures for 1,000 years, it is never about myth alone. Perhaps the kings of Europe were not hiding what they had done. Perhaps they were hiding what they were. And if that blood still flows, behind smiling faces and ceremonial crowns, then the true throne of Europe was never abolished. It simply went underground. If you walk the corridors beneath Europe's oldest royal palaces, you can feel it, the weight of time, the silence of secrets too deep to die. Centuries of dust may cover the floors, but the air still hums faintly, as if remembering. Because the story of kings has never been about crowns or thrones. It has always been about inheritance, and what was inherited was never merely land or power. In 2021, a classified report leaked from the European Historical Genome Project, a study intended to explore ancient aristocratic DNA. The document was labeled Anomalous Data, Group R0. It contained genetic readings from samples taken, discreetly, from the remains of European monarchs exhumed for reburial or conservation. What the report revealed stunned even the researchers. Each of the ancient royal samples contained the same non-coding sequence, a genetic fragment that appeared nowhere else in modern human databases. But the same sequence was also found in living descendants of those royal lines. They called it Fragment 0R, or, privately, the golden thread. Its molecular structure exhibited properties not seen in ordinary DNA. It was unusually stable, unmutated after millennia. Under magnetic resonance imaging, it emitted faint luminescence, a soft golden shimmer. One scientist described it as biologically inert, yet somehow active, as though it was waiting for something. The implications were immediate and terrifying. If the fragment was truly unique to Europe's royal houses, then the phrase blue blood had never been symbolic. It was literal. And it meant that Europe's kings were not merely rulers by birth, they were designed to be so. Shortly after the leak, the entire dataset was erased from the project's servers. Every printed copy of the report was confiscated. The official explanation: contamination and data irregularities. But one researcher, who later fled to Norway, sent an encrypted message to a journalist before disappearing. It isn't contamination, it's continuity. There are patterns, invisible to the public, that still bind Europe's surviving monarchies. The shared schooling of heirs, the quiet intermarriages among cousins, the blood screenings before engagements, all are explained away as tradition, protocol, or genetic precaution. But beneath that civility, there is calculation. In private archives, there are lists, genealogical keys that trace not just descent, but resonance. According to one British intelligence memo from 1967, obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, a classified committee known as the Royal Genetic Council was established after the war. Its purpose: to maintain the purity of dynastic inheritance and ensure the unbroken transmission of the core sequence. In other words, the secret lives on. Every coronation, every anointing, every ritual you've ever seen is not just a symbol of faith. It is an act of reconnection. Each monarch, knowingly or not, participates in the renewal of that ancient fragment. During the coronation of Charles III in 2023, the ritual followed centuries of pattern: the oil, the blessing, the hidden moment beneath the canopy, unseen by any camera. Observers described the same thing again, a stillness that filled the air, a hush that seemed almost electric. Those close enough to the anointing canopy swore they felt a vibration underfoot. Coincidence? Stage lighting? Or something older, stirring again after generations? The deeper question remains, why preserve it at all? What power could this fragment, this so-called golden thread, still hold in a world of science and democracy? Perhaps it's not power in the political sense, but something metaphysical, a memory embedded in blood, a kind of genetic key, connecting those who carry it to whatever force first gave rise to civilization, kingship, and order. Because if the ancient chronicles were even partly true, if a being once walked among early humans and shared its essence with chosen rulers, then the bloodline itself might be a conduit, a living link between the human and the divine. And that, above all, would explain why the secret was never meant to surface. For in that secret lies a question no empire, no church, no scientist wants to face. What if humanity's first kings were not entirely human? The Vatican archives still hold restricted volumes labeled De Sanguine Regum. The British Royal Collection maintains several sealed reliquaries with no catalogue number. And every year, on the night before Easter, a private service is held in Windsor's deepest crypt, unseen, unrecorded. Only a handful attend. No invitations, no witnesses, only descendants of those who have always known. There they sing an old Latin hymn, Lux in sanguine mane. The light remains in the blood. And when the hymn ends, they open a golden vial said to have been passed down since the days of the first king. Inside is a liquid that glows faintly, not by candlelight, not by reflection, but by its own radiance. Witnesses say it is warm to the touch, alive. So, you see, the kings of Europe were never merely hiding their sins, their greed, or their politics. They were guarding a covenant, one that began before history, when mankind first bowed to something greater. And even now, long after empires have fallen, that covenant endures, sealed not in stone or scripture, but in blood. The question isn't whether it's real. The question is whether we're ready to know what happens if it wakes again. And remember, if you wish to hear the next secret the history books dare not tell, subscribe to History 1. Because next time, we open the final chamber beneath Europe's oldest crown,